and which made me reminded me of our conversation that we had through email about Roseanne Barr.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Oh yes,
about,
of course.
Yes, and about Ambien.
Yeah.
And about the effects of Ambien.
She came on the show.
She still hasn't.
Oh.
She can't. She's having a really hard time with this. She feels terrible about what she said. She feels like the whole world hates her. She feels like she's lost everything and her life is destroyed and she's distraught. And she was going to fly out here, but we had a conversation and we kind of decided it'd be probably better if she waited. Just let some of this pass by. It's still in the news because they've decided to move the show on without her. They're going to kill her off or something.
Oh man.
Yeah, and she's just devastated. And she was also devastated health-wise, physically. She's an older woman, and not that it'd be any different. She was an older man. She's an older person, and this grueling schedule of doing a television show was horrible on her. It was really, really tough to do. She got bronchitis. She felt like she was almost dying. She was completely exhausted, and she felt like the schedule of it all was just way too taxing on her physically. Then on top of that, she's on a host of different things. She'll, if we ever do wind up sitting down and talking on the podcast, I'll get her to list the various things she's on. But she's on various antidepressants. That she changes them up, mixes them up. One of the things she said to me, she needs to get her doses readjusted. She drinks alcohol regularly. She smokes marijuana regularly. She's also on Ambien regularly. Takes it every night to go to sleep. And I tried to explain to her the fact that you're not getting real sleep when you're on that. This is not something you should take and rely on a daily basis. They even tell you to get off of it. I mean, it's difficult to get off of it. But people want to dismiss the idea that she could have said something that's completely out of character or done something that's completely out of character while under the influence of this stuff, that it could have contributed to that. They want to dismiss it because they want a villain. They want, no, she's bad. They want this childlike, simplistic reasoning and rationalization for what she's done.
Right. And this is, a prime example of the sort of schizophrenic nature of the way drugs are depicted in our society. If it's something like bath salts or K2, they're responsible for everything. One toke of that stuff and you're eating your best friend's face under a bridge. But then in Roseanne's case, they have no explanation whatsoever, no exculpatory value. They can't be used to explain anything. Is it an excuse? No. Is it an explanation? I think yes. I think that intoxication can explain all sorts of inappropriate behavior, and to pretend otherwise is, again, dishonest. I know Sanofi, the pharmaceutical company that manufactures Ambien, had this widely shared tweet saying that racism isn't a side effect of Ambien, but it's a little bit ridiculous for them to have done that, especially to someone who's mentally ill, because if you look at the medical literature, the fact of the matter is that Ambien is associated with all sorts of absurd behaviors, command hallucinations where people stab themselves, jump out windows, people that, butter their cigarettes and smoke them, people that paint their houses in the middle of the night with no memory whatsoever. And it's a profoundly, profoundly disinhibiting drug. So, here's maybe a somewhat analogous example from my own life. I never take Ambien on planes for this reason, because I'm around strangers. I don't know what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do, let alone use Twitter. But it's uncomfortable because it's so disinhibiting. I might do something weird. I don't know, take off my shirt. I have no idea. Who's to predict what you're going to do when you have no inhibitions whatsoever? So I remember once I was on the plane to Berlin and I did take Ambien, and I start in a sort of delusional state thinking that the cabin crew and the person that's announcing over the intercom is saying various Nazi things. That's like an unfair stereotype that all Germans are Nazis. That's offensive. But I had no control over this. Like, just because they're German, talking in German doesn't mean that this is like a Nazi airship, because you're just completely out of your mind.
Wow.
But again, I mean, like another story. I used to be friends with a girl whose dad was a psychiatrist, prescribed her immense quantities of Ambien, and she would snort it. There's no reason to snort it. It's water soluble. It has a fast onset of action. There's no benefit in snorting it. It's fine orally if you're going to take it at all. And there's no reason to take high doses. It's already a deliriant at the therapeutic dose. You don't need to take more. Even 5 milligrams induces delirium. But I remember I was at some party and someone was saying that they wanted ketamine. Did anyone at the party have ketamine? And just a complete stranger. And I said, oh, I actually have a little bit of ketamine, but it's at my apartment. Here are the keys and here's my address. And just run over to my apartment and help yourself. Talk to you later. And then I'm one of these people. I've never lost my phone, never lost my keys. I don't lose things. So then I wake up the next morning, go to my apartment, reach into my pocket. My keys are gone. And then it hits me, this flash of, oh my God, I gave my keys away to a complete stranger to go to my apartment and take ketamine from me. What on earth was I thinking? What level of disinhibition is required to do something that insane? Luckily, I had to spend the rest of the day tracing, finding out who that person was, getting my keys, and these people happened to be very courteous people and actually did go to my apartment, did take the small amount of ketamine that I had, and then just locked the door after themselves and didn't make a mess. But again, I mean, this is a profoundly disinhibiting substance. And also, I think the idea that a drug couldn't modulate racist activity is interesting as well, because there's a study that you can look up where they used the beta blocker propranolol, and they found that it actually seems to block implicit racial bias in people in certain tests. What they're suggesting is that there's an adrenergic component to implicit racial bias, but there's a certain maybe heart rate or fear response, and once that's physiologically blocked, you become less racist in a sense, implicitly. It's not a conscious decision. Conscious racism isn't reduced, but an implicit racial bias is. I mean, these are like really complicated, higher level questions about how drugs impact cognitive functioning, and the bottom line, I think, is be careful being certain about anything, about what drugs can or can't do.
What is this, Jamie?
Oh, this is the story.
Blood pressure drug reduces inbuilt, what is that word? Inbuilt racism. Common heart disease drug may have an unusual side effect of combating racism. Wasn't that there was that stupid movie with Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt, As Good as It Gets? He was a racist, and they gave him a pill. They gave him some medication, and it reduced racism.